Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And don't forget to go and get yourself that sparkling effervescent drink or something very warm and comforting to drink, because some of us are feeling quite cold right now. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Cole Pennington was a free spirit who valued his freedom more than anything else in the world. Even as a young boy, he'd envied the birds of the air, soaring high in the sky. He wondered what it would be like to be able to fly like that so freely. He knew some birds migrated every year, flying over thousands of miles with their light feathery plumage, and to be able to fly over such vast distances he thought was quite marvellous. Of course, Cole got to see a lot of birds growing up in the heart of the prepossessing Colorado countryside as a young boy. His father would occasionally take trips to Denver once or twice a week, but had managed to conduct the affairs of his business from home. So Cole was privy to growing up with both his parents being around, which was a jolly good thing, as Cole would be there one minute and gone the next, so he needed to be watched at all times. Let's just say Bert, his father, recognised in his son the maverick, intrepid, venturesome spirit he'd seen in his own father when he was a boy. He knew that a profound streak of his father's adventurous personality had robustly meandered down the family genetic line, leaving its indelible influences on his own offspring. And even to look at, the handsome, raven-haired, green-eyed, curly-haired young boy was the splitting image of his father. When he compared a picture of his father at a similar age to his son, it had sent surprising twitches down his spine. By Jove, he'd thought to himself, my father has almost risen from the dead. He is a carbon copy of my son. Who would have thought it? Mr. Pennington got brief glimpses of his father he'd known as a boy, smiling cheekily back at him through the wide-spirited eyes of his son, like the fleeting shadows of sunshine dripping through the forest canopy. Mr. Pennington knew his father had been famous for just getting up and leaving his family home on an unrepressed, impetuous whim for a couple of days, without a bye or leave, leaving behind him a distraught wife who believed something quite dreadful had happened to him, until she became acclimatized to his father's comings and goings. She soon learnt there was a wandering side to her husband's nonconformist lone wolf personality that she called the Black Panther. "Please, for God's sake, Geoffrey, tell us where you're going," his mother would say. But her husband's trips were so impulsive, he never gave his wife any advance warning that he was taking off for a couple of days. "Why do you keep doing this to me?" his mother would ask him incredulously. "Why do you abandon us every now and then for a couple of days? Help me to understand this idiosyncratic behaviour of yours." His father had shrugged his shoulders. "I'm not trying to upset the apple cart. I get caught up in the moment, don't I? Everything for me is unprompted, involuntary. My responsibilities abandon me like a bird on the wind. I just enjoy escaping the hassles of my life. And once I've been out in nature for a while, I feel I can bounce back to my life again. Sometimes it all just becomes too much for me. I feel as if I can't breathe, as if I'm suffocating. I feel a reckless urgency to escape all the hassles and complications and troubles of the grindstone. I like to leave it all behind me, breaking free, like a stallion in the wild." Bert Pennington was determined that, come what may, if his capricious son was going to trot off for a few days on a spontaneously impulsive wild adventure, they wanted to know where he was going. As during his teenage years, Cole had enjoyed a lot of solo camping trips, especially along the Appalachian Trail, always insisting on going alone. "It may not be a big deal to you, son," he would tell him, "but it's a big deal to us, especially for me, growing up with a father like I did. We want to feel assured that we know where you are at all times, so that if something untoward was to happen to you, we would be able to call for help. You do hear the most dreadful stories out there. Me and your mother don't want you to become one of them.
If you must insist on camping solo in the Americas, we must know the route you are taking on your trip. If we don't know where you're going, as far as I'm concerned, you can't go, and that is final."
When Cole was a little boy with cute little dimples on his cheeks and long, luxurious dark lashes framing his cobalt blue eyes, it was very difficult for his parents to get aggrieved with him. For how could you get angry with a perfect little angel that warmed up the cockles of your heart and naturally made you smile? And Cole had that effect on everyone who met him. "I'm so glad he's not my son," one woman had told Mrs. Pennington. "I'd never be able to scold him for bad behaviour, not when he looked like that." As a young boy, he possibly spent more time on his bedroom floor with sheets and pegs, industriously trying to create little tents or secret dens to sleep in, always preferring the excitement of feeling as if he was camping al fresco, which he so much preferred, than luxuriating on a comfortable mattress in his bedroom. When he was in his early teens, unbeknown to his parents, on warm summer nights, he had surreptitiously crept out of the farmhouse and slept in a hammock under the stars, staring up at the Milky Way, and falling into a deep, blissful sleep, drifting off to the pleasing sounds of the crickets and frogs. One night, when Cole was fast asleep in his hammock, he had awoken to find it swinging backwards and forwards vigorously on its own, with a boisterous enthusiasm. It would seem something was pushing him. When he had sat upright to look around him, nothing was there. But Cole got the overwhelming sense that something or someone was watching him. He could almost feel the tinkle of laughter in the air, although he couldn't audibly hear it. Cole hadn't been afraid, but he had been perturbed and rather mystified. He knew someone had pushed him on that hammock, but who? One morning he woke up to find his hammock decorated with pine cones, and on another he was sure he'd seen a shadowy figure and a human face looking at him. But the experience had been so ambiguously obscure. He'd wondered if he'd dreamed the experience or not. Was it a dream? Was it real? He would wonder. From thenceforth, every time Cole slept on the hammock, something would always give him a boisterous push, until he finally sat up and said, "Whoever you are, please leave me alone. I'm trying to get some sleep." Like magic, as if on cue, subject to Cole's orders, the rest of the evening his hammock was no longer subjected to vigorous swinging movements, but he always got the distinct impression that someone clandestinely hugging the penumbra, like the nebulous, indeterminate trees in the woodgrove, was laughing at him. But he could not confide such preposterous revelations to both of his parents, as they would not be best pleased with their son sleeping under the stars at will. When Cole was 8 years old, on one occasion he had abandoned his mother's shopping trolley in a local supermarket and gravitated towards the pigeons, waddling onto the sidewalk, that were pecking at the tarmac. Cole reasoned the poor birds had little to eat. He needed to rectify the problem for them. He had helped himself to a loaf of white bread on the supermarket shopping aisle, and marched out of the shop without being noticed, with a big loaf of white sliced bread in his hands, and a determination in his heart to boot. It would seem his name had been called out on the shop intercom. "Attention all customers! We're looking for a little boy. His name is Cole Pennington, 8 years old, wearing a white flannel shirt with a Tyrannosaurus Rex on it, and a pair of olive shorts. He was in the supermarket minutes ago, and has gone missing. Cole Pennington, please come up to any shop assistant on the floor. Your mother is waiting for you." The police had been called to find him, and there he was, standing nonchalant on the sidewalk, without a care in the world, feeding the birds, looking bemused when everybody was panicking about his whereabouts. His mother had burst into tears, holding him so close in her arms, as if she was afraid to ever let him go. "Thank God I found you," she said, blowing her nose in a tissue, and suffocating Cole with one of her tight, clawing hugs that would easily squash the air out of his lungs. "Don't you ever go walking off like that again. Do you understand me?" she had scolded. "I was just feeding the birds," little Cole had protested. "I could tell they were very, very hungry." Then there was a time when Cole was a Boy Scout. He'd vanished for half a day, aimlessly wandering around on his own, soaking up the arresting scenery like a happy sea sponge, blindly oblivious to the pandemonium he had caused. when everyone on that camp was looking for him, as Cole had a habit of wandering off, following something that had caught his attention, mindlessly unaware of the mayhem and chaos his disappearance had invariably incited. Cole did not do this deliberately, by any manner of means, but got so caught up in the moment, so beguiled by the natural world, so absorbed by the little things in nature, that time would be swallowed whole, like a fly that drops into your drink, and before you know it, it's gone down your throat. Suffice to say, Cole was insensitively clueless about the trouble his wandering off had brought about. His despairing parents had tried to rein him in, like an unbridled, untamed wild horse that needed to be broken in. But Cole had a mind of his own, and loved nothing better than being on his own, especially surrounded by the trees, the wild animals, and the prepossessing allures of the natural world. And he loved Colorado with a fervent passion. Growing up, when there had been big parties over Thanksgiving and Christmas, Cole found all that socializing far too daunting, very overwhelming. He had wanted to escape it, and would often retreat into his bedroom and just watch the sun setting over the horizon, as some of those smouldering golden Colorado sunsets can quite literally steal your breath away. Sometimes he'd take a walk in the woodgrove, no matter how treacherous the weather. Everyone would be saying, "Where has Cole got to?" And his parents had reached that place of understanding that Cole enjoyed his own company, and too many people was for him like being stuck in a football stadium with crowds of cheering people that were hemming him in on every side, so he couldn't breathe, and the suffocating claustrophobia would make him almost want to scream. Cole liked small, intimate gatherings, not large, grandiose affairs that would bulldoze your individuality and rob you of meaningful conversation, where the trivial became the topic of the day and was being bounced around between strangers like a rubber ball. Wasn't it a hot summer this year? And did you see the prices of the turkeys in the supermarket recently? Cole was 22 years old when he moved into his parents' tennis pavilion, which he had magically transformed into a rather comfortable, cosy den, with a couple of his mother's luxurious couches, a double oak sleigh bed and matching bedstands, along with complimentary oakwood furnishings, courtesy of his mother's generosity, of course. As a young man that prided himself in his autonomy, the last thing he wanted to do was to sponge off his parents, but accommodation was expensive these days, and he was still at college acquiring a degree, and working part-time as a waiter at a local restaurant in town to bring in that quintessential money that was needed to cover his accumulating rising costs, as believe me, for a young student, there were many. Like any other student, he was always broke, and on the lookout for finding any jobs going spare. He'd lend his hand at anything, painting, washing cars, yard work, anything that was going. To give him his due, he was a hard worker, a spirited young man with great integrity. Since his parents had not played tennis for many years, it seemed nonsensical that the large changing room, little kitchenette, and delightful shower room of the tennis pavilion was not being used or appreciated. It was going to waste, overlooked and neglected, a part of the property almost abandoned, forsaken and long forgotten. At first, when Cole had suggested moving into the tennis pavilion to his mother, she had been appalled by the very idea, viewing the place no more than a miserable bug-infested yard shed that had seen better days and was crying out for renovation. "Goodness gracious me, you can't live there, Cole," she had said, sounding mortified. "What about staying with us indefinitely? I mean, you're still young, Cole. Is living with your parents that bad?" "I don't want to live with you at my age," Cole had piped. "I may only be 22, but I don't want to get too comfortable at home and be living with you well into my 30s. When girls hear you're living with Mummy and Daddy, they think you're a real sissy or a mummy's boy. I can't have that. It's either your tennis pavilion or I'll have to find a student's dig somewhere. You know I value my independence, Mum." "There is nothing wrong with that tennis pavilion, sweetheart," his father had said, addressing his mother with a persuasive tone to his southern drawl, as he lent his support to his son's eager requests. "Let's just say a good old cleaning, a quick coat of paint, a good mattress and a new pair of curtains. That place will be perfect for our son. I know exactly how Cole feels. I was like him at Cole's age, couldn't wait to get away from my mother's clutches. Don't get me wrong, she was a very good person,
gave me everything I could ever want. But the trouble was I wanted my freedom. And that mother of mine was forever breathing down my neck. You can be a bit like that with our Cole, he said to his wife.
Mrs. Pennington's forehead furrowed in a long ribbon of lines that resembled a railway track. She had looked visibly affronted. Her face grew red with indignation. She shook her silver-grey pixie-style haircut vigorously, and her slender, unamused lips twitched.
"How dare you, Bert, suggest I breathe down our son's neck?"
"But you do," Cole's father had bellowed, the laugh rising through his throat like a bullfrog.
"Don't take it personally, sweetheart. You're a great mother, you really are. I'm not demeaning you in any way. Mothers are naturally nurturing by nature. You are the way you are as you love our Cole, but don't you see, he needs his space. If you keep mollycoddling him in the way that you do, breathing down his neck like a dragon, you'll drive him far away from our home."
"Don't you get it, Bert? Or are you living on an alternative universe? Our son is 22 years old, not 30 yet. I'd like to remind you for the record that many 20-year-olds still live at home, especially with the excessive costs of student accommodation these days. It's an arrangement that makes sense for so many. It's more a matter of convenience and financial common sense, if you ask me. It's a win-win situation. I see no reason why Cole can't continue to live under our roof."
"Even so, sweetheart, you can be a bit like a clucking old mother hen the way you fuss over our Cole. I've seen you myself. You seem to forget that he's a big boy now. For God's sake, let him move into the tennis pavilion. It'll do him the world of good to have his own independence. And for your peace of mind, you'll know exactly where he is."
Cole's mother's shoulders slumped in a checkmate stance. Her lips were pinched. She looked offended. Cole hated it when her demeanour seemed to slip into a sulk, which happened when things didn't look like they were going her way, and her powers of persuasion had fallen on mute ears that seemed intent on not listening to her sagacious advice. This was a battle she could not win, and defeat was not a happy word she gladly entertained. Even so, Cole, living not too far away from her on the same plot of land, was a lot better than losing him to some stinky student digs. "Are we that dreadful to live with, sweetheart?" his mother asked, her face washed with hurt, her wide eyes almost misting over with tears that she daren't spill.
"Oh, Mum, for goodness sake, stop taking this personally, will you? I'm getting older. I'm 22. It's not a good look for someone my age still living with his parents. I need my space. Can't you see that? I don't want to be answerable to you or anyone else for that matter. I want to live my own life. Is that too hard for you to understand? Please don't make it about you, Mum. It's not about you. It's about me. It's the way I am. You know I've always been a bit of a loner. I've always liked my freedom, my space, and my privacy. Can't you understand that?"
"It's hard not to take it personally, Cole," said his mother. "You're my only son. You're leaving home. It's a big deal for me. How am I supposed to take it? I defy any woman out there who would dare say it was easy, their progeny leaving home like this."
"Well, he's not really leaving home, is he?" says Cole's father. "Cole will still be around, sweetheart. If he's living at the tennis pavilion, you'll know he's around, and that should give you a measure of comfort. Go on, sweetheart. It makes perfect sense. You mark my words, once that tennis pavilion is cleaned up, it'll be a lot more inviting than most of those student digs out there. I think the old place will scrub up very nicely indeed. Have a little faith, will you? You're like the woman who looks at the thorns on a rose bush and fails to notice any of the roses. If you remember, when we used it for tennis in the good old days, it was a perfect little retreat. We'd eat sliced oranges in the kitchenette there, drink back iced glasses of lemonade and tea, and we would have long silver platters of sandwiches. People would get very cosy in that living room area, and some would have a good shower in that bathroom after a game of tennis. And I know all the connections work, although we'll have to run that water for a while. Some of it might be a bit rusty. If you remember, it used to be a very pleasant place to hang about with friends after a tennis match. That place retains a lot of happy memories for me."
"Why did we stop playing tennis there? I can't actually remember."
Don't you remember that big dog we had? What was his name? Snickerdoodle. Well, he ran into the court after I finished a game. I tripped over him, broke my ankle. We stopped playing tennis after that. Don't you remember?"
Mrs. Pennington raised a brow.
"Oh, that dog was such a klutz, wasn't he? Running into everything. I don't think he appreciated his large size," she chuckled. "Such a pity we gave up the tennis, though. It kept me in good shape, you know. Look at me now with my waist. It's thickened considerably. I've even got chicken wings under my arms these days. That would never have happened if I'd continued with the tennis." "Honestly, sweetheart, listen to yourself. You can be very glib at times. As far as I am concerned, you're as beautiful as you were as the day I married you. Mind you, you're more so, actually. You're like an oak tree. In its youth you were stunning. But that's not a patch to a mature, superior oak tree. And you are that superior tree. You've grown more beautiful in my eyes." "Oh, listen to your father, Cole. He's quite the charmer. He'd make a sow's ear believe it was a silk purse. He really would. I'm just worried about that tennis pavilion. The place is teeming with spiders. There must be dust absolutely everywhere. It's going to take a lot of elbow grease to get the place looking halfway decent again. I mean, that little building has been neglected for many years. Don't forget that."
Of course, Cole's mother had not been wrong. The tennis pavilion was a sight for sore eyes indeed. Certainly eyes that needed soothing eye drops and lots of reassurance. There was a plethora of carcasses of dead insects littering the oakwood wooden floors, and an impertinent dust seemed to cake everything in a cloying thick powdering of dirt. There were leaves that seeped under the doors and were blown into the pavilion. But Cole was not to be put off. With some hard elbow grease, in no time at all, he managed to turn that tennis pavilion into his own luxurious private sanctuary, and it had scrubbed up into such a gleaming, cosy den that even his mother had been wowed by the results and retracted her doubtful words. "Goodness gracious, this place looks absolutely amazing. I'd happily live here myself, you know." "I told you," said Cole, grinning from ear to ear with a smug satisfaction. "Just because a treasure is covered in dust doesn't mean it's not worth saving. This place has jolly good bones. Anything that has good scaffolding can be brought back to life with very little difficulty, you know." The tennis pavilion was sufficiently far away from the main house that he could live his life in peace, without his parents breathing down his neck. Even growing up, Cole had valued his space and privacy in a way his mother could not comprehend. So this newly acquired, spectacular, rather sumptuous sanctuary on his parents' sprawling property was a peaceful haven, and he felt so much more connected to nature in this part of the yard, where there were rambling wild roses, honeysuckle and jasmine, having overtaken the fences of the tennis court, and a kaleidoscope of colourful birds that regularly frequented the untamed part of the property, that branched out into wild meadows and woodgroves full of tall, lofty trees. Cole woke up at the crack of dawn, to the charming, uplifting musical trills of the dawn chorus, while he thoroughly enjoyed drinking his cup of coffee, seated on his Adirondack chair on the patio, drinking in the sensational mountain views that were a reliable landmark on the compass of his life. Cole loved their sculptural majesty, the intriguing nooks and crannies of the jutting rocks, the sweeping white vaporous mist that would hover sneakily over the mountains. Little did Cole know that he was not going to be alone in the tennis pavilion for very much longer, as a mysterious cat that Cole decided to call Marco Polo had serendipitously decided to move in with him. The cat, a very attractive grey, had impertinently jumped through the open kitchenette window and subsequently demanded food from Cole by meowing persistently until Cole had put down a saucer of tuna for him, and then it had happily settled down next to Cole on the sofa in front of the television, stretching out its paws in satisfaction and purring incessantly. And that had been that. They do say that cats can choose their owners. And Cole had obviously passed the grade and the inspection as far as Marco Polo was concerned. The cat did not hesitate to take possession of him. Perhaps it takes one free spirit to recognize another, and Marco Polo had found for himself a kindred spirit. One night after a hard day of study, Cole was absolutely exhausted. He lay on the couch in his living space and fell fast asleep, only to awaken with a start, when his cat Marco Polo was lunging his sharp paws into his chest, as if to wake him up, his yellow eyes fixed on the window. Cole sat up with a start, realised he'd been asleep for some time. His attention was drawn to the window of the sliding doors that opened out onto the porch, only because Marco Polo was looking directly at the windows. That was when Cole saw this huge, enigmatic face staring at him, pressed directly against the window, with eyes that gave off a blazing red eyeshine. He was so sure he was dreaming, but when he rubbed his eyes, the thing, whatever it was, had gone. What the hell, he thought. But he began to believe that from the precarious journey of sleep to wakefulness, perhaps he'd got caught up in an illusory cobweb of misleading, fanciful interpretations that could not be trusted and relied upon. What he had seen was a picture created by an overactive imagination, he thought. It was the following morning, when Cole was to discover strange smudges on the outside window. He knew that something had been looking in at him, but what? He could not imagine, and more to the point, he didn't want to imagine either. It was early in the morning. The sun had only just broken over the horizon. The delicate morning light had pierced through the sky, while the earth's atmosphere was cool. There was a soft breeze blowing. Cole fed his hungry cat, Marco Polo, a plate of tuna fish. He immediately put on his walking boots. He hadn't been in the family woodgrove for many ages. They lived on a vast sprawling property with ample space for exploring. But when he went out on an intrepid adventure, it was always away from home, to explore some trail he'd learnt about via the grapevine. Cole did not know the land on his property as well as he should have done, and certainly not as well as he did when he was 8 years old, which was a big pity. He was certain that something had looked in at him last night through the living room window of the Tennis Pavilion, and whoever they were, they must have come directly from the woodgrove. He was sure what he'd seen. He knew that at night things can be ambiguously intimidating. Your imagination can run awry and create in your mind ideas that don't actually exist. Let's just say he wisely reasoned that maybe some vagrant, realising the woodgrove was free from any prying traffic, had chosen to camp out on the property. It didn't sit well with him that someone could be trespassing on their land. He wanted to get to the bottom of this baffling mystery. Over the years his father had the property fastidiously tended to, the trails in the woodgrove cleared, the meadows often grazed by the neighbours' cattle. By all accounts, as a family, they'd pretty much ignored the resplendent treed oasis that stretched out so magnanimously. As a young boy, he'd found a secret sanctuary he called his own special place. So on this unassuming morning, as he wandered off into the woodgrove, he had a skip to his step and a swagger to his walk, and in a trice all the study that had cluttered his mind like a clogged-up kitchen plug abandoned him. He found himself caught up in the magic of the moment, as memories of his early childhood came flooding back. He was astounded by the growth of the trees, the rich forest fauna and flora that lavishly littered the forest floor with a viridescent resplendence that this early in the morning, under the twinkling dewy light of early dawn, was eye-catching to behold, and simply took his breath away. The forest smelt of pine and wild flowers, and the lofty trees seemed to jiggle in the wind, swishing their verdant boughs as though dancing. Cole had seen deer scampering away from him as he walked down the woodland trail. He'd spotted some rabbits, a couple of squirrels, and then all of a sudden, as his focus had been distracted and his attention was not on his feet, he lost his footing and went crashing down this long hole, and then everything went black. So there we are. That's part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.